Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own language it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating the various building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. What do I mean with a planetary civilization? I basically mean that we as humans should become aware that as the dominant species, actually, we're not really behaving as adults, right? We're at best behaving like early adolescents because the ramifications of our own behavior have a vast impact. There's a terminology that says we're living in the Anthropocene, which basically means we're really shaping all of the mother organism, all of planet Earth, all of the material resource flows that shape the sum total of all living beings on this planet. Anyhow, this is episode somewhat like 71 or something like that. And I want to start with a small joke. And I know that my guest was not prepared for that because actually he did hook me up on his product. So his product always showed up in my Instagram feed. And I'm like, what is that? So I clicked on it, didn't buy it, but he got me excited and I bought the lifetime version. So I will introduce the guest in the virtual room together in a bit. But what really got me fascinated is that I think he's onto a very specific niche. And the niche I would call, after biohacking, hacking your mental models. Because many of us are not aware, unless they studied psychology or social psychology, that actually our thinking and our perception is made up out of, in my own language, I would say somewhat like Lego blocks that we're not aware. So most of us are really navigating everyday reality, let's say our relationships, the way we show up in business, the way we judge, like hugely biased. So most of us are not aware of their own mental models, their own ontologies that shape our perception, our speech, our behavior, and our relationship patterns. Having said all of that, it's a great pleasure to connect in between Guatemala and in Munich with Philip Hagspiel. And like always in my podcast, before we dive exactly into the product and why do I think that's such an interesting thing for everybody to get to know and hack your own mental models and your way to perceive and act in the world, Philip, introduce yourself, like always in my podcast, with a couple of pivotal moments in your biography that shape the way like how you are as a human being. I'm really curious what made you the human being that you are and what set the path forward to creating such an outstanding product. The floor is yours. I'm really curious to listen in.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Alistair, for having me. It's a great pleasure. Love the introduction. Super nice. Really appreciate it. And so I'm Phil. I'm born and raised in Munich. I'm based in Munich, Germany. And by day, I work for a fintech startup in strategy. And by night, I am trying to make the world a better place in my little area by sharing ideas and, as you said, mental models as good as I can and in a hopefully engaging sort of way. And I don't want to bore the audience with my full CV, so to speak, but when I would say as an early adult or right in my teenage years, I shifted very strongly and only understood in hindsight why that was. I shifted very strongly from focusing on entertainment content and watching a lot of just sports and just basically consuming content for fun. I shifted more and more towards consuming content for education. In the beginning, it was not intentional. It became more and more intentional as I sort of noticed that I'm doing it and that I'm actually benefiting from it. And then I intentionally sped it up. And I realized that using content consumption as a form of education rather than only entertainment, nothing wrong with entertainment per se, but as a form of education rather than entertainment only, is a power beyond imagination, because we are consuming content, whether we like it or not, all the time. And I'm not just talking about through your phone, although that's the majority for most people, but by just living in a world where we are constantly bombarded with information, right? And I just had for some reason, I just had an epiphany moment where I realized that, hey, if I become a little bit more aware about the different pieces of information that I consume, then all of a sudden I become more powerful in shaping my own, as you said, Lego blocks, my own mental models, my own ideas. And I kind of realized, I think at first more intrinsically, that this also changes tremendously how I act in the world, and it, makes my life actually better. And okay, moving along through my life, just university, got a business degree, started working very early, got in a good position, started leading teams very early, much earlier than usual, and out of necessity, I started engaging more with psychological content, right? So I didn't do it academically, but I just dove into a lot of psychological topics that I hoped would help me become a better leader, although I was super young, that I hoped would help me basically build a better life for myself and the people around me. And then I basically understood that diving into the field of psychology, and then later also philosophy, and then later on cognitive science, and then the intersection of all three and more, that this unlocks a power and ability in yourself that just doesn't happen by accident. So you need to be intentional about doing it. And I think it was around when I was 26, 27. I went to Peru, of all places, and basically I think added the last piece of the puzzle, at least until now, that sort of like shaped all of my my mental map that I use going through the world. And sort of I engaged a lot of spiritual practices, ayahuasca, and so on. And I also realized that there's also this hidden layer of perception that is not immediately and instantly accessible all the time, and that we also need to put an effort into understanding and then integrating. And yeah, so there were these kind of like phases where I just developed sort of this mental model of the world in a broader sense through different pieces and different lenses that I collected over the years at certain points in time. Some just inspired by my career.
Then let me tie into that, because I find that very interesting. I didn't know you did ayahuasca, although we spoke twice. So let me tie that into into my own biography, and why I think the topic of today, which I would call like meta learning and meta-ontologies, or ontology mapping, or mental model mapping, is so important. So before the bachelor and master reform, I started to study in the year 2000. I always present myself as a macroeconomist because that's where I put most of my focus. But actually, I studied without one curriculum, and I studied macroeconomics, sociology, psychology, and law in one integrated diploma. So unconsciously, I started my studies, but it became increasingly obvious that the textbooks, including the people, including what they were working in what profession after their studies, was greatly shaping the way how they perceived the world, which I found like oddly interesting, right? And I personally feel incredibly grateful that I stumbled upon the integral framework from Ken Wilber, which simply helps to map ontologies. I don't want to make that too theoretic. Can we start maybe with a confirmation bias or any other bias that usually shapes the perception of most of the people around us? Let's imagine you're a leader and you're early and you're starting, digging into all these rabbit holes of cognitive biases. What are a couple of cognitive biases that you think most people are unaware of, so that we can take some examples that when you as the listener become aware of your own cognitive biases, that this greatly enhance your meta perception and metacognition in order to shape both your perception as well as your behavior. And you're really welcome to choose one or two or three and make it a live conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a super great point. And actually, I think cognitive biases were the very first, very specific area of investigation that I found super interesting. So 100%, I can agree that understanding them is tremendously important. Although it doesn't make you immune to them, of course, but understanding as so often is the first step towards improvement. So I think, I mean, the most that people, or the one that most people have probably heard of before, but I think is also among the, maybe it is but it's one of the most powerful ones, is just confirmation bias. I think that is one that everyone is susceptible to, everyone falls prey to all the time. Even if you know that it exists, even if you know how to spot it, you will still fall prey to it. Maybe a little bit less, which is already an improvement. So confirmation bias is basically just our intrinsic drive towards seeking things around us that confirm what we already believe, because it makes us psychologically, emotionally safer, or feel psychologically and emotionally safer, because it is it's psychologically, it's a good feeling to feel that you're correct, that you're right about the world, right? That there's nothing that will surprise you tremendously and that could, steer you off course. So how that shows up in life is basically, I mean, if you, the most basic example is, if you believe in a certain theory, whether that's a fringe conspiracy theory or it's a mainstream one, right? If you go online, the first thing you'll do is this true, or why is this true, right? That's confirmation bias at play. If you talk to people, 5 people tell you A, 1 person tells you B. If you believe B beforehand, you will think that person B, that the person who tells you that B is correct is actually the smart person in the room, and the others are full of crap, right? And in business, I think that is extremely hurtful, and it's extremely prevalent. I think even among.
Then let's stay there. I like the example of the confirmation bias because it's a very obvious one, and maybe you as a listener, stumbled over that. And I just want to dive deeper into that rabbit hole in the context of first social media and then AI, because I really think it's a very dangerous one. So it doesn't really matter. So let's just take something a little bit like fringe, right? So 9/11, right? It doesn't matter what our opinion is about 9/11. But the interesting thing, the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, especially on social media has created a crazy world in just the last 15 years, where the likelihood that your confirmation bias gets stacked upon. So let's just stay with 9/11. So let's just imagine you believe the official version, for example, right? Then you will stumble upon people that confirm, right, that you're right? The official version is right. The same with Ukraine, or the same with the situation in Sudan, just to take political examples. And I really think it's not so easy to try to influence the algorithms against your own confirmation bias. So I can only share how I do that out of social media. So the way that I try to consume media is very consciously that when you look upon a bell curve, so bell curve basically is a normal distribution of information or the leaves on a tree or so. So the way that I try to do it is I consciously consume mainstream media, very consciously, the mainstream news media outlets. And then I fade out my own bell curve to, let's say, classical left wing, right? Let's say more pro-state, pro-socialist redistribution of wealth, so that I get consciously a different angle, ideally on a similar topic. But I also go to the, let's say, more right, conservative, liberal side of things. Outside of social media, that's still pretty easy to do, because let's just take this example, right? Upon a political conflict or let's say an economical issue, I can choose a mainstream news media outlet, a rather left-wing, and a rather a right-wing. And then I at least have 3 different opinions upon the same topic. Doing that in social media, though, I find increasingly difficult, because the main thing that social media platforms are programmed on is to make it as sticky as possible. And obviously, the things that I find interesting, the algorithm will instantly produce more information confirming my confirmation bias. So anyhow, I think this is a rather simple example and a rather simple bias. How do you try to handle that with these given examples? And what would be your recommendations to listeners?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great examples. Actually, as you were talking, I noted down a few more biases, if you will, or mental models in a broader sense that I think are deeply connected specifically to what you just explained. And I think with social media in particular, I mean, not just Instagram and co, but basically all sort of social interaction online. I think this is especially important. And I would say 2 things that are connected here. So one is the plausibility bias, right? Where you say that if a story sounds plausible or something sounds plausible, and plausible meaning if I run it in my mind, the narrative in my mind, it seems to make sense, then I jump to therefore it's probably true, right? Therefore it's probable. But there's this nice distinction within the plausibility bias where you can distinguish between the 3 P's. P number 1 is it possible? Physically possible, right? Because if it's physically impossible, then you can say, doesn't matter what, if it's physically impossible, it's not true. Is it possible? That's the first hurdle very often. Yeah, it's possible. Let's stick with 9/11. Let's just say, okay, what's being called the conspiracy theory of it was a false flag, event or attack. Is it physically possible that it is so? Yeah, of course it is, right? Okay, check. Is it plausible? That's the second layer, right? And that's where most people jump to immediately, and that drives a lot of confirmation bias. And that is the question of, okay, if I tell that story in my mind, does it feel like something that could be true? Because there are good arguments for it. I understand the motivations of people behind that. I can imagine someone doing that, vividly. It's all very plausible. It's like, yeah, in this case also kind of feels plausible, right? Obviously, false flag events have happened in the past. We know that there are many nefarious actors in the world, especially on the political stage, and so on and so forth. And then we come to the next layer, where is it probable? And there, I think that's the most powerful level of examination against confirmation bias, where we have to ask, okay, what specifically needs to be true in conjunction for that overarching thing to be true, and how probable, right? You just assign a probabilities, each of these things, and if they all have to be true, you multiply them, right? It's very mathematical, but that's basically how it works, right? If you have, and that's not intuitive for many people, if you have 3 things that all need to be true simultaneously, and each of them has a probability of 80% that they're true, then what is the probability of that whole thing, right? It's 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. And then we're very close to it's just 50%. It's a coin flip. Although each of these things is 80% likely, right? And then you multiply, you add 10 more events and multiply those. And then all of a sudden, the whole plausible narrative is just 10% probable, right? So that's one thing. I think that's it sounds very mathematical, and obviously we don't know, what real probabilities are in the world, or if they even exist, right? That's a completely different topic. But I think one thing to shield against confirmation bias is just to say, okay, the story that I seem to believe, because it sounds plausible to me, is it not just plausible, but is it also probable? What are the things that really need to be true for that? And is it really probable, although it sounds plausible, right? So that's one very powerful lever. And then the other thing, I think, and you hinted at that, is just the pure realization of that it is so easy for us these days to tap into different voices and narratives and opinions online that whatever you choose to believe, you will find enough evidence for your belief online, right? And that's even true on a more emotional level, where you say, okay, whether you're pessimistic or optimistic about something, you will find enough evidence to be pessimistic, to be optimistic. You will find enough evidence for this opinion or that opinion or that opinion, right? And just realizing that fact, I think, is powerful. And then the third one, I said two things, but actually I thought of a third one, is because when you pointed the picture of the bell curve and how you can, at least with traditional media, very often, very consciously, get opinions from different ends of the spectrum, which I think is an extremely smart and very conscious habit of yours, and I think it is very powerful. What I think you could even add further into this is sort of like a believability weighted view, right? Where you say, okay, if you have different opinions on a certain subject, you need to at least, you as the general listener, you need to at least try and think about whether all of these opinions should be weighted equally, right? So if you, for example, have a certain opinion on a certain business topic, and then my great grandmother, for example, right, which or my grandmother, who doesn't really understand anything about business because it's never been a part of her life, if she has an opinion on that same topic, obviously these opinions are not equal, right? And that's an extreme example, but that is the case almost or basically all of the time. Sometimes the difference, and very often the difference, is just not that extreme between two opinions in terms of how believable they are, right? How much weight we should give them. But if someone is very certain about something, but we shouldn't necessarily believe their opinion too much, and someone else isn't that certain about the opposite, but we should believe their opinion much more strongly because maybe they have a lot more experience in that area, then it doesn't come down only to comparing different opinions and how strongly someone believes A versus B, but it comes down to how confident are they multiplied with how much should we actually trust their opinion and their confidence themselves, right? So these are different layers of just exploring that confirmation bias and thinking about it from different perspectives.
Yeah, I want to share a nugget / a recommendation to the listeners. I strongly believe in the Pareto rule. So the Pareto rule is not a mental model, but I strongly believe that in 20% of the input of your time, effort, lifetime, you get kind of 80% of the output. So my recommendation is, if you have never thought about the own mental models and the ontologies that are shaping your perception, the likelihood that with a very little input of time, literally either downloading your product or just buying a bunch of books, and every now and then just spending 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, instead of just watching a movie, a series, and confirming all your biases, to stay with that example that we now discussed in length, will really break up or break open your perception and the likelihood that you have a new insight that really profoundly shapes your perception, the way how you live your relationships, the way you show up in business, the way you perceive yourself in your biography, is really just plain and obvious. I want to put that into the framework of the podcast. Why do I especially think that impact entrepreneurs, so those that strive to use the power of business to have an environmental or social impact in the broadest sense, it's such an important topic that you become aware of your models and frameworks. I think it's important because when you look from a theory of change perspective at what you aim to do, you need a business rigor, But suddenly your business endeavor becomes infinitely more complex because you're not just trying to, let's take a super simple example. I don't know. I live in Antigua, Guatemala. It's a rather upper class, middle upper class, posh-ish main wedding destination, beautiful small town. So imagine you want to become a simple example of an impact entrepreneur. You start an ice cream store and you want to pay the people fair wages, and you want to have the produce and the supply chain to be local. So you become one of those ice cream shops who sells amazing locally produced, maybe even organic ice cream. That's good and fair, right? So that's only on the entrepreneurial level. But once you then start of wanting maybe to employ more women and get women out of poverty, or you're suddenly finding out, wait, it's actually not that easy to get like organic certified milk in Guatemala. Or wait, actually the cash crops, they're all getting exported. So it's actually really not that difficult to get the cardamom out of Guatemala because it all gets exported to the United States and Europe because Guatemala is one of the main cardamom exporters, let's say, just maybe because you think you can sell like cardamom ice cream at a price premium. So it becomes infinitely more complex. In that specific example of the theory of change, like that you want to have an impact with your ice cream store, you need to be infinitely smarter than a normal entrepreneur, because the normal entrepreneur would basically just aim to maximize his ROI and sell as much ice cream at the lowest price point. But once you factor in a lot more of the complexity, like here shared, fair wages and the fair supply chain, maybe organic products and maybe locally sourced and all of that, you really, as at least my recommendation, you need to break up your own mental habits, because actually to be successful as an impact entrepreneur, you actually need to outperform the other entrepreneurs. You need to be smarter, not necessarily saying working harder, but certainly working smarter so that you can survive in the marketplace. Ideally have a price premium or a differentiator in that market, because there's a good chunk of really amazing locally produced ice cream stores in Antigua, that sell fancy ice cream to tourists or expats like me. So if you really want to do that, you need to simply outperform them. Can you give an example besides mental biases, but you're also welcome to share more biases, where your own investigation has shaped, let's start maybe with business, the way you show up in business and as a leader?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, fully agree with the notion that being an impact entrepreneur comes with a lot more complexity, and you need to be infinitely smarter, and you just have many more restrictions that you put onto yourself, right? Within which you have to act and yield similar results and returns, which by definition makes it harder, right? If your inputs come from a smaller base, then you need to be much smarter about how you work with them to yield the same or a similar output. So I think that's a great example. So I think one of the biggest changes that I personally had through engaging with and developing for myself and encountering different mental models that helped me show up much better as a leader is, I actually have a couple in mind, but I want to start with one that you also referred to at the very beginning. And I call that the map is not the territory. And that is, I think, something that's extremely powerful in the business context, because we all need to understand, and whether you're an ice cream parlor or if you are, a CEO of a huge company or anything, in between, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are a business leader as an employee in a larger corporation, the reality that is, the business around you and the organization around you and the people you're working with and the people you're leading or the people that depend on you and all of your stakeholders, that reality is infinitely complex. That's the territory. And there is the more you zoom in and the more you ask why and how does this work and how is this related to that, it never stops, right? And we have to coarse grain our perception of what is happening around us, meaning we need to operate on a somewhat higher level that gives us a lower fidelity of what we see in front of us, because we're not capable of accounting for every tiny, infinitesimally small part of everything that's around us. That means what we're dealing with and what we're using to navigate reality is a map. A map is an abstraction of that which is really around us. And understanding that, if we want to have an impact in the world now as an impact entrepreneur, that also here we need to use a map, and we need to actively shape our map to become a better representation of the territory that we are operating in. And I think that is on a meta level, so to speak, the realization that the map is not the territory, plus that we're always using maps. We're never looking at the territory itself at full resolution. It's always lower resolution, and we need to be conscious about and aware of how we are actually choosing these maps and choosing to build these maps, and then adding a piece here, adding a piece there. It's like when you go on Google Maps, and that's a map of the territory around you, obviously, but it's not the exact same thing as looking outside the window and seeing what's in front of you. Now I'm looking outside the window here in the room that I'm sitting in, and I see the tiniest branches of the trees and tiny little brown leaves that are about to fall off the tree because it's autumn now and it's about to be winter here in Munich and it's cold, and the little leaves are withering away and they're dying. Those are infinitesimally small parts of the real territory that I see in front of me. And however great the map is that I can use, it will not cover all of that, right? So we need to be aware that we're always using maps in even our relationships with our spouses, our families, our friends, because we never know the full reality of what they are thinking in that moment. We never know the full reality of how they are perceiving us in that moment. We never know the full reality of how the people that we're leading in business are perceiving us, what they're going through in private, what they the deepest opinions and beliefs and convictions they hold, however well we know them intimately and emotionally. So there's always a map that we're using, and we need to consistently refine and improve those maps, test them against reality, and just be critical of ourselves and ask ourselves, okay, is the map I'm using here, what kind of heuristics am I using? What kind of proxies am I using? What kind of dumbed down opinions do I have that I use to make decisions and to act in the world? And is there a way to improve them? I think that's a meta realization that has helped me tremendously in business and as a leader, and also as an entrepreneur myself.
Then let's take another feature that's shown up on the global stage with a very heavy impact. So we sketched a little bit the confirmation bias and really the social dilemma, right? And that has profoundly eroded the underlying interstitial tissue for democracy, for example, because everything falls into left and right, yes and no, and the middle ground that actually makes democracy possible is heavily eroding. So let's take AI, right? And I wouldn't coin myself an expert, but in no domain I've invested more time, effort, including money, to educate myself on how to interface with AI. So I think when social media is already a tricky issue, it becomes very dangerous and way more dangerous, like this double-edged sword, if I interface with AI, I would say almost every day, in business, in work, for research. So unless I try to hack my own, let's say, mental representation, because I have like the pro mode of ChatGPT since the first week and yada yada, and I have the local memory on. So the likelihood that again my AI just spits out more of Alistair instead of asking me critical questions, and act more as maybe a mentor, somebody that challenges me, a therapist, or just a critical friend that maybe is on a very different end of the political spectrum, is again very likely. So let's stay a little bit on the AI topic, even though at least I think in the current iteration, your platform doesn't use AI features. But I'm curious, out of your own diving in, into all of these deep rabbit holes and creating your product, how have these different mental models influenced the way that you make use of AI, especially in the business context?
Yeah, that's an extremely good question. So I also just like yourself, I'm using AI, especially, but not only chatbots, of course, of every color, if you will. Basically, all the time, every day at work, tremendously useful, tremendously helpful. But I agree, they come preloaded with certain biases, if you will, right? By nature of A, how they're programmed, but also B, by the nature of the architecture they're built upon, right? I'm not an engineer, but I understand enough about the architecture of how especially large language models functions, that this has an inherent bias that as long as we're in that domain of large language models will very likely not be overcome automatically, and we have to make an effort to account for that. And so when using AI, I think is a good question, because it's a pattern that I actually noticed not too long ago in myself. Is there's this typical problem of AI always agreeing with you and basically cheering you on and telling you how smart you are, and great, Phil, and oh yeah, wow, what an amazing observation, yada yada, right? So and a couple of weeks ago, actually, I noticed that my interaction with AI has been very similar for some time, like my interaction with a toxic best friend. Not that I have a toxic best friend, but it's how I imagine having a best friend that is kind of toxic. And that is that person, the AI, gives you the feeling that you are correct in your own mind, that whatever story you're telling yourself is, in the broader sense, correct. And however confounded that story is, and however preloaded with confirmation bias it is, it always gives you the feeling that in the great scheme of things, you're amazing, you're great, you're doing fantastic, it's great. But here's just one tiny thing that you could add to that story, and it never pulls you out of that and puts you into a completely different context. And what I realize is, and I'll ask, relating it to your question about how do mental models help with AI, what I realize is that this is very similar to what I would say is a cognitive version of the homeland bias, or the closeness bias, where everything that is close to us in investing, for example, that's a very typical one, right? Many people invest more into their domestic stock market, although the global stock market is available, simply because it's more familiar to them, right? So familiarity bias, where we believe things that are familiar to us. And what is more familiar to us than our own thoughts? Nothing, right? That's the most familiar to us, right? So the familiarity bias, or I call it the homeland bias, because we feel home with our own thoughts. That can be applied to so many things. Investing, it can be applied to, we believe the things that we encounter daily tend to be good because we're familiar with them, and therefore they have to be good. Otherwise, our life wouldn't be good, and we don't want that, right? So And understanding that AI is, or at least large language models in their chatbot form, very often almost prey on that familiarity bias, because it almost feels like these chatbots know that they will get a better interaction out of you and a sort of like a positive feeling out of you if they confirm that familiarity bias, right? And they confirm the familiarity you have with your own thoughts in your own mind. And so that's a long-winded answer of saying that being aware of the fact that everything that is close to you, that feels familiar to you, and you thinking your own thoughts makes your thoughts very familiar to you, that in and of itself creates a pitfall. And we need to counter that by just basically just discounting everything that we're familiar with by default, because we're over-indexing on it. And AI just reinforces that familiarity. And if you're aware of that fact, you just have to, by default, discount everything that chatbots are trying to reinforce, everything that chatbots are agreeing with based on what you're saying, everything that chatbots are trying to use to move you into a certain direction that you've started moving into before. So all of that has to be discounted. Going into any kind of interaction, and that's also a very difficult thing to do, right? I'm saying this as if I'm doing this daily with every interaction. I don't, but the moments that I have throughout the day where here and there I become a little bit more aware of my own thoughts and my own interactions with AI. I try to remind myself of that fact. So that's, I think, was one big thing.
I want to stack the social dilemma and there's even a movie from the same people, right? The AI dilemma onto each other. So imagine you, the listener, much like I reckon the two of us, are at least time and again using social media. And you're at least time and again using AI. So you're basically stacking two exponential functions that influence your behavior, your thoughts, your emotions, your perceptions, your cognitive, and I would add your emotional biases onto each other. And I just want to give at least two biographical examples. So I posted a couple of things in the last years. Thank you, plant medicine. Right? It's a big hashtag, usually happens all around the planet for people that had a big breakthrough experience working with a traditional plant medicine, such as ayahuasca. So I was a fervent proponent and have introduced a lot of people to plant medicine, especially, I would say, in my 30s. I'm 46 now. What I then became aware of, I'm like, wait, Alistair, there's also critical voices in the global, let's just stay with ayahuasca, the global ayahuasca circus. There are really people for whom it's not the best choice, maybe also not the right medicine, not the right plant medicine. And people really end up in mental asylums with psychosis breakdown and really don't get over such a strong intervention. And this really struck me. So I took the rabbit hole against my own confirmation bias that most of the people that I know who did ayahuasca really greatly profited from that, and stumbled upon a whole range of very dark, suppressed facts, right? That people really shouldn't do that specific plant medicine because it's a very strong psychedelic intervention. There's really a good chunk of people who never integrate that, or that take years to integrate it. And there's clearly also indications, clear psychological and epigenetic and genetic indications for people that should not do ayahuasca. So just as one example, how I try to frame a strong bias towards a certain recommendation with also the dark side of ayahuasca. And then I waited for many, many, many years. I don't know when I recorded it, but I did a whole episode on the dark side of ayahuasca with two facilitators that have worked in world-renowned institutions where all of these things that you don't want in marketing, because obviously everything is happening nice and you just do more marketing, more people drink ayahuasca. So that's one. The other example, and I agree with you with AI, I was oblivious of, let's say, the AI dilemma, right? I was using ChatGPT, I don't know when it showed up, I think 3 years ago, like all the time. And just somewhere subjectively, I had the feeling it's actually not making my analysis better. It makes them more superficial, and it actually dilutes my own critical genius, right? That I have some hard expertise, specifically in sustainability, because that's what I dedicated my whole life to, and now 18 to 19 years of my career. And I'm like, how is that possible? And it took me a while in separate, like, Reddit threads. So it's not so easy to get access to that, so that I actually can prompt on a very profound level, but it's not so easy. You need to have the local memory on, and then tell AI, everything that you have done so far with me, ever since the first interaction that I downloaded ChatGPT, from now on, I want you to behave differently. I want you to challenge me, ask me critical questions. Do not always confirm with me, to not just dilute me, but really ask me critical questions. And I only started to do that like 3 months ago. So I think 2 nuggets, right? If you only have people around you, books around you, information around you, series around you that only confirm what you anyhow know, well, maybe there should be a big question mark out there that should challenge you, right? I don't know if the listeners have ever been in a coaching, mentorship, healing, therapeutical, shamanic relationship. Usually all of those mentioned persons, they wouldn't make your life easier. You would go to a session and you would cry. You suddenly may have questions around the way you show up, the way you earn money, the way you live your relationships, the way you relate to your parents. So you would engage with a person that actually challenges you. It challenges you in a good way to begin to grow, to wake up, to increase your capacity to hold tension. And I truly think that AI can be a genius factor, but I'm only starting to unlock AI to really critically ask me about the quality about my information, the quality of the third-party resources it's citing, the quality of my own thinking and logic. And I really think that those listeners who are listening in, who are strongly interfacing with AI, should also start questioning the way they prompt AI and interface with AI. Anyhow, Philipp, this was an amazing conversation so far. It's really hardly ever that I allow even people to present a certain product or a company or something like that. But your niche really struck me. I only played around with it for a couple of hours. But what I find really interesting, it's almost like this these coffee table books, right? You have a product where you can look into it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're bored, you're worn out, it's the weekend, right? And you can instantly get access to mental models, to recommendations, book recommendations that challenge your own thinking. Can you share me a little bit the genesis of your product, where it is standing, what people can get out of the product, and why actually, did you come up with that product? Because so far, and I'm really a research nerd, and I try to find similar things like what you're aiming to build in an MVP status is live and you can buy it, I think, for a very fair price. Why it is not out there? Because once I saw it, I'm like, hey, I've actually been waiting for years for such a product, right?
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. Super happy to hear. Makes me happy and proud that you're using it and find it so valuable. So a digital version of a coffee table book. I like that. I think I'll steal that and use that in my marketing material. I really like that. So my product that you're referring to is called Mosaic, and Mosaic, as the name hints at, is a collection of ideas drawing from the space of mental models that we've discussed, cognitive biases, from just raw ideas from psychology and other fields of science, from rationality and thinking, and from philosophy, from Eastern thought, Western thought, traditional thought, and it combines those ideas and nuggets into an easily accessible collection that I believe is necessary for someone to really engage deeper, start engaging deeper with deeper ideas. And what I mean by that is, and I like how you said, oh yeah, it's 10, 15 minutes, get nuggets here and there. That's exactly the intention of it, right? Because if we think about, and maybe I think this also very well explains why Mosaic exists and why I wanted to build it. In a world that's full of opportunity and struggle, right? Which is true, right? The world has infinite opportunity, the world has infinite struggle. And that's the reality we live in. And I think the one goal that we all share, although the definition is very different, is that we all want to live a good life, right? And that can mean very different things. I'm very certain it means something different for you than it means for me, and it might even mean something different for people very close to me, and it means something very different for everyone listening. But we all want to live the good life, and I think that this buzzword, personal growth, or buzz term, personal growth, that is being bastardized by so many people, I think in essence it just means improving your ability to build a good life. I think that's all that personal growth is about. And that good life means just wanting to live the life as it is. Again, it means very different things for different people. But that ability, building that ability, is personal growth. And I think that ability requires a certain development of your beliefs and your skills, right? Your beliefs about yourself, about the world, about yourself in this world, about what's possible, plausible, probable, what we talked about, and your skills, right? Your skills with things, situations, people, and your skills about thinking about something, deciding, taking action. And both your beliefs and skills are fundamentally built upon ideas that you hold in your mind. And an idea is any piece of nugget, like any small thing that makes you or inspires you to think something, to act on something, to change your emotional state, whatever it is. Everything that you interact with mentally, neurologically, is a form of idea. And it all then, basically following that logic, comes down to engaging with better ideas. You can engage with worse or better ideas. And better ideas meaning they help you further develop your beliefs and your skills that then increase your ability to build, the life you really want to live, the good life. And if I look at the world, there is no shortage of good and inspiring and powerful ideas, right? So it's not a problem of availability. But you hinted at, the social dilemma. We talked about confirmation bias. We talked about all of the noise around us. So the problem is not availability of good ideas. The problem is accessibility, because there is a crowding out of good ideas because noise buries signal, right? So because noise just gets more engagement, because it's easier to engage with it than with deeper ideas. And entertainment crowds out education, right? So entertaining content crowds out educating content, because by definition, it's more entertaining and it makes it more engaging, right? So although there is a huge availability of good ideas out there, it's difficult to access them if you're not extremely conscious about it, because it will not happen by accident. It will not happen automatically. And so what I have decided that I want to contribute is to help people make good ideas, and therefore personal growth in the good sense, a very natural part of their day, right? Of their life, and help them kickstart the journey that has helped me tremendously in my own life of exploring different ideas much more deeply and connecting them and connecting ideas from, all sorts of places that you would naturally, automatically, by default, never stumble upon. And I think that these ideas need to be in a nugget form, and they need to be, or we need to just realize that, attention spans are just shrinking, and we need to be competitive in how we portray ideas with all of the highly entertaining ideas that are not so educating around us. And so I created Mosaic as this collection of partly visualized ideas and partly maximized in terms of turning it into maxims and aphorisms of ideas that, just like you said, if you engage with the product for just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you browse through it, you will encounter a few things where you say, okay, I don't understand this, it doesn't really resonate. But you will encounter a few things where you say, oh, that's interesting, aha, right? It's basically just trying to create aha moments on steroids. And these aha moments, hopefully, will lead you to investigate further, whether that's, reading a book about it, whether that's Googling about that topic, and then all of a sudden a rabbit hole opens where you enter a space that starts to challenge you in a way that you've never encountered before. And I hope that by bringing Mosaic out in the world, I can help people just scratch the surface of powerful ideas from all sorts of fields, because they're engaging and entertaining to consume in a way. And then based off of that, start their own journey of developing further and increasing their ability to build their good life. And that is right now, Mosaic is in version 1. You can easily buy lifetime access. It's not expensive at all, as you know. And I'm currently working on a second version of it that will be more personalized, that will be more dynamic, more interactive, and so on. But that's my focus for the next couple of months, just improving the product further.
Yeah, let's bind that all together. And I really like the metaphor of a coffee table book, and especially when you mentioned accessibility, because I think, including myself, I notice, especially in this confirmation, that the way that I grew up, I'm such an old guy. I grew up before the internet and was reading like books and books and books. And in a way, we're very much shaped by our surroundings. So this virtual coffee book, I like these aha moments on steroids. Certainly when I bought it, it's not that it has all been new to me, but what I became painfully aware of, I'm like, okay, Alistair, you studied that. That's now 25 years ago. You have done like a whole roster of personal development, like for like 15, 20 years, but currently you're pretty much caught up in your everyday dynamics, your company, coordinating investment, building 783 capital partners, having all these outbound calls. And I was really struck that I needed to really constantly refresh, right? To again become aware of my own biases, right? Including the recommendations. And I agree, from this aha moment on, I was then simply opening up again my own further research, be it via AI or, just refreshing on a deeper level, what I again had buried somewhere in my consciousness. I wonder how we end this one. I think I want to underline the main takeaways. For me, the main takeaways is in an age of social media, the social dilemma and the AI dilemma. I think it's increasingly, I would call it indispensable, but it also just gives you as an entrepreneur an unfair competitive advantage to become aware of the mental models that you're using in order to sort through complexity and like walk this extra mile, because once you hack your own perception, actually it can really be from an instantaneous short 5-10 minute aha moment that you embark on a rabbit hole that will really profoundly shape and impact and change your biography. Because the less you are aware of all the things unconscious in your own mind, biography, and emotions, the more you're really running on autopilot. So I think this online coffee table book is a beautiful pointer to at least sometimes challenge your own assumptions. Please do not only get confirmations from friends, family, parents, mentors, coaches, and finally, on the AI part, if you're interfacing with an AI that's always just tapping on your shoulder and saying, Alistair, you're so smart, or Philip, you're so smart, then maybe you should really challenge your way you're interfacing with AI and make it a tough mentor, a tough coach, a tough therapist, whatever, right? So that you really can grow on the edge. What do you anyhow know? Because if not, you will simply reproduce more of the same. So especially those who are listening in who want to change something, right? This is not, I'm not saying if you're happy with everything, like love, life, money, sex, relationship, education, parents, all of it is like happy, clappy, and just a big cuddle puddle, cool, enjoy. But if you're listening in and you want to change certain things, I think really one of the most powerful interventions that I found in my own life, and I know we both know the meta framework from Ken Wilber as well, is really hack your own mind, right? Hack your autopilot. And this can be done with really little time invested. Anyhow, I think these were my closing words. Do you want to leave with some closing words to the listeners?
Well, you said it perfectly. So there's not so much more to add. There's one aphorism that I really like, and that if you really deeply think about it, I think that very often helps you understand all of these different challenges. And I think that is, paying attention to what you pay attention to is a superpower. And that as a guidepost, I think can help us navigate many of these different dilemmas and complexities.
So thanks for that aphorism, and I will do my own closing words. Once you become aware that you are aware, so you develop a meta-awareness or a meta-consciousness, you're actually in the meta-programming mode, right? So you're literally able to reprogram at least bits and pieces of your own biography, your upbringing, your culture, your parents, your friends. So I really like it. Maybe we close with that. Once you become aware that you are aware, you really become the master of your destiny, at least in part, because you can shape the way how you perceive reality. Phil, it was a great pleasure, and I hope you get some interesting people that get interested in Mosaic. And yeah, I really think it's a super important like niche that you're working on with version 2. Yeah, thanks for the conversation, Phil.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.